This is the first mini lecture for social problems for fall of 2020. If you have access to a printer, it might be a good idea to print a copy of the outline. That way you can follow along as you listen to the lecture at the same time. The first chapter deals primarily with defining what is a social problem, and also going over some of the terms that we will be using throughout the semester. So, first of all, what is a social problem? And the book says it's a condition that a significant number of people believe is a problem, and a condition in which there's a sizable difference between the ideals of society and its actual achievements. Now, if you look, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think we're all familiar now with what's been happening since George Floyd was killed by the police officer. A large number of people agreed that that was not appropriate and that was not a good thing. So there were hundreds and thousands of people all over the world, very large groups of people, that began to pull together and make a statement that they did not agree with this. Now, what are they disagreeing? They were disagreeing with the fact that people of color are not really treated the same as most white people. This is called racism and discrimination and prejudice. And how does that go against the ideals of our society? Well, if you think about our own Pledge of Allegiance, I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, if you listen to those last words, liberty and justice for all, is there liberty and justice for all of us the same? Well, as you have seen with Black Lives Matter, so many people believe that people of color are not given the same liberty and justice as most white people. So then, does discrimination and racism go against the ideals of our own society? Yes, it does. So that's why racism, prejudice, and discrimination is a perfect example of a social problem. Lots of people now have come together to agree that racism and prejudice is not acceptable and that it goes against what our society and our own government has put forward, that we are created equal and that there should be liberty and justice for all. And that's not happening with people of color. So racism would be a perfect example of a social problem. Now, the next definition is a social movement. How do we deal with social problems? And the way most of us deal with a social problem is to pull together and try to do something to correct it or make it better. And so the definition of a social movement is a group of people that have banded together to promote their particular cause. And again, just like Black Lives Matter, lots of people now have banded together to try to promote equality and justice for all. So when we talk about a social movement, we're talking about giving time, energy, sacrifice, sometimes your own money, into something that you really believe needs to be fixed. And that can take a lot. So what the book talks about is, if you want to get involved in a social movement and you want to make a difference, which I hope all of you at some point in your lives will step up and do, it's good to take a look at what will make it successful, because you don't want to get involved in something and give it your time, your energy, maybe even sacrifice, and maybe even your own money, and then have it fail. So it's good to take a look at what will make a social movement more successful. And those 5 things would be, first, publicity, the media. You want the publicity in your corner. You want the media in your corner. You do want them you want to make them aware of what you're doing in your movement. And obviously the Black Lives Matter got a lot of publicity and media coverage. So that was partially good. but you also don't want the media there when things are going badly. In other words, when the protests were peaceful, you wanted the media there. But when the protests got violent, it would have been better for them not to be there, because then obviously it kind of put a bad mark on the movement. So you want to be able to maneuver the media in your favor. You want them there. You want to use them to make the public aware, but you also want to make sure that they're there for the right reasons. They're there when things are going well, and you hopefully want to keep them at a distance when maybe things aren't going so well. So it's really learning how to maneuver the media. And then the second thing is a strong leader. And through the last 50 years, probably one of the strongest leaders, which almost everyone knows, is Martin Luther King. Well, what makes a strong leader, and why do you need a strong leader? Because it inspires people and it motivates people to get things done. And what are the qualities of a strong leader? Well, some of the main qualities: they have to be a good communicator, which Martin Luther King was. They have to be passionate about the cause, which he was. They have to be inspiring, which he also was. So a strong leader, and also they need to be able to sacrifice. And Martin Luther King sacrificed his own life. He always, before he died, he said many times that he didn't feel he would live long enough to see his children grow up to be adults. He knew there were lots of people against the civil rights movement, and he knew there were a lot of people that wanted him out of the picture. And so he pretty much banked on probably not living a long life, that someone would try to get him out and get rid of him. And unfortunately, that's what happened. But he was willing to do that. He was willing to go forward. He believed in it so strongly. So it takes a good communicator. It takes someone who can inspire people, but it takes someone who's willing to sacrifice. And that's why Martin Luther King was such a great leader. He covered all of those things. And the next thing they talk about is political power, wealth and influence. You need people of wealth and influence to be on your bus with you. And you may not even like some of those people, but you need them, because people of wealth and power frequently can get things done. They're connected with others that can get things done. And so having people with of not, and that's not the only people you want, but it's important to have some people with wealth and power, because they do tend to be connected and they can get things done for you. And then number 4 is appealing to people's values. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's appealing to people's values in the sense that people shouldn't be murdered because of the color of their skin. And I think everyone feels that that's a good value, that you just don't go around murdering people for no good reason. And so that is appealing to people. And also the fact that there's a lot of racial injustice, and that goes against a lot of the values that people in our society have. So another good example is programs that deal with children, like Valley Children's Hospital. Every year, Valley Children's has a big newspaper drive, and they stand on the corner and sell newspapers, and all the money goes to Valley Children's. Well, in our society, we're taught to protect and take care of children, that children are vulnerable and need our protection and love. And so, does helping sick children appeal to our values? Absolutely. And that's why every year when they do the newspaper drive, they frequently get close to $1 million. So whenever you get into a cause that appeals to people's values, it will be more successful. And then the last thing to always consider is the strength of the opposition. No matter what you think, no matter how good you think your cause is, there's always going to be a group or someone who doesn't agree with you. And so you always need to know who those people are. If a group that opposes you or a person is extremely wealthy and powerful, they can ruin everything that you're doing. So you always want to know who are the people that don't agree. Who are the ones that are going to go up against you? Who are they and how powerful are they? And could they ruin it for you? So you want to find out who those people are and be aware of how to handle them. Well, the next definition that we're going to talk about are roles. And what is a social role? And it's in the book, it says a set of expectations and behaviors that are associated with a social position. And we all have lots of different roles. I have a role as a teacher. I also have a role as a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, as a friend. So we all have different roles in our lives. And the next definition is a social norm. The norms are the rules that tell us what behavior is acceptable when we're in a certain situation or role. And for instance, as a teacher, what is expected of me is to know my material and um, to explain it so that it can be understood and in a professional manner. But again, my role as a mother would be to contribute to my family, to help take care of any children. So there's different norms and different expectations in every role that we are in. And then the next definition is a deviant. And a deviant is defined as an individual that violates a social norm. And it's a person that is labeled as a deviant by others. Now, most of the time we think of a deviant as a criminal. For example, a serial killer. I think we'd all agree that a serial killer is a deviant. And they're going against the social norm, which is you don't kill people again for no reason. Okay? You can only do that in self-defense, and that's a law. So, and many of the norms are laws, not all of them, but some of the norms that we live by are actually laws. But a deviant is a person that goes against those norms. So, for example, a serial killer or a sexual predator, a pedophile who has sex with children. The norm is you do not have sex with children. That is very damaging to children, and we're supposed to protect them. So, a sexual predator or a pedophile would be a deviant. So, normally we think of a deviant as someone that is uh, uh, almost a very serious criminal, but that isn't always who they are. There are people that go against the norms because maybe the norm does need to be changed. For example, I really personally believe that the reason why Hillary Clinton is not president right now is because she went against the norms. She was a deviant in a certain way. She's not a criminal. I don't, well, maybe some people think she is, but I don't. But she's not perfect. But I think that she went against the norm. She stepped outside her role as a woman. Women are not supposed to be the leaders, they're usually the followers. And women are supposed to be the norm. What is expected in the role of a woman is to be gentle and kind and giving, and again, to be a follower. And but in order for her to be president, she had to be strong and be a leader. And so she was kind of in a bad situation, in that no matter what she did, she was going to be in trouble, because if she acted like what is expected as her role as a woman, and what is the norm when she's in her female role, it would go against what would be expected for her as a president, which is to be strong and be a leader. And women are supposed to be more weak and follow. And so if she acted like a woman, people wouldn't look at her as presidential. But if she acted presidential, then she was deviating from the norms that would be expected as a woman. So it's just to say that a lot of people that we consider deviant are really doing some serious harm to people, but not always. Sometimes deviants are people that are stepping up and possibly changing some of the norms, or stepping outside the norm. And I'm not saying all norms need to be changed because we do need social rules. We need those. But sometimes they do need to be adjusted, they need to be changed. And so sometimes deviants can be the people that are doing that. And then the next definition is a social institution. And that is defined as a relatively stable pattern of roles and behaviors centered on the performance of an important social task. And examples of a social institution are schools, police forces, fire departments. What is schools? Their task is to educate. Fire departments obviously is to put out fires. But a social institution can also be the family. Does the family have an important social task? Yes. The family has the task of protecting and socializing children in the next generation. And so when we think of a social institution, we frequently think of something that's in a building, but it can also be a family. And then the next definition is social class. What is a social class? A category of people with a similar share of things that are valued in society. Well, what is valued in our society is money and material wealth. And so the more money and material things that you have, the higher social class that you would be considered in. And what are the social classes that we have in our country, in our society? And we have upper class. And in the upper class, it is mostly wealthy people that they call white collar workers. And they mean by that, when they talk about white collar workers, they're talking about professional people, doctors, attorneys, accountants, because most of those people, when they go to work, they're wearing a suit and tie or a suit of some kind, professional clothes. So they call those white collar jobs, white collar workers. And so that is considered, and they usually do make a lot of money. Doctors, lawyers, accountants frequently make quite a bit of money. So they're also highly educated. Usually upper class people are highly educated, and that's how they get those jobs. You have to go to a lot of schooling to be a doctor and an attorney and an accountant. So they're usually highly educated, and they are called white collar workers. And then you have the upper middle class, and those people are frequently teachers, and people that might own a small business. They do quite well, but maybe not extremely wealthy, but they do quite well. And then you've got the middle class, and those people frequently have jobs such as plumbers, electricians, um, trades that they may have had some kind of training for, but not the education that a doctor would have. And and then you have the lower middle class, and those are usually factory workers and people where you don't need a lot of training or education for. And then you have the lower class, or people in poverty, and frequently those are people that are on government assistance, or and a lot of those people are women with children, single women with children. And if you are a single woman who has had a child at a very young age, you haven't had a chance to get a lot of education that it takes to be a doctor or an attorney. And so frequently, a young woman with children without a lot of education doesn't have the ability to have a high paying job. So frequently they are in the lower class and on government assistance. And then the next definition is culture. And it says the way of life of the people in a certain geographic area, particularly their ideas, beliefs, values, patterns of thought, and symbols. And most of us do relate to some type of culture. I relate to Portuguese. My background, my grandparents are from the Azore Islands. And so the Portuguese have a lot of traditions. They have a lot of food, certain Portuguese food that they tend to cook a lot. And so that is part of what I think, I believe, my culture, my cultural background. Many of you have cultures that you relate to, the Hispanic culture, the Asian culture. All of those cultures have a certain ideas, beliefs, traditions, things, food that they cook, and that defines their culture. And then the next is a subculture. And the definition of a subculture is it's a culture that exists and is highly influenced by the larger culture, but they also have some of their own ideas and beliefs. And an example of that would be gangs. Gangs are influenced by the larger culture, but gangs kind of go by their own rules too. They have some of their own rules that don't aren't the same as the larger culture. So a subculture exists within the larger culture. It's influenced by the larger culture, but it also has some of their own ideas and beliefs that are somewhat different and unique. And then a society, and that's defined as a group of people in a geographic area who share common institutions and traditions. And we have that right here in Visalia. We have a society here. We share the same schools. We share the same police department. We share the same businesses. So any group of people that are living in a geographical area and they do share common institutions will be considered a society. And then social structure. And this is very interesting right now in terms of the pandemic, because the definition of social structure is an organized pattern of behavior and social relationships within a society. In other words, normally in a society, the social structure in our country is that young children get up every day and go to school, and they go to a school building and they have a teacher, and they go at a certain time every day, and they get home at a certain time every day. They do their homework and they get up the next day and they go to school again. The social structure for adults, for most adults, is that they get up in the morning and they get ready for work and they go to their job and they come home at a certain time and they uh, take care of their children at night and all of their chores. Well, right now, that social structure has been so disrupted because of the pandemic. Um, many school children are not going to be able to go to school the way they normally do. Just like you right now are not able to come into the classroom at COS. And a lot of people are not going to their jobs and to their offices every day the way they have maybe for years and years. And so our social structure provides us a lot of stability to our society. And right now, I think one of the things that is so stressful for all of us is that our social structure has been highly disrupted by the pandemic and having to stay home and not being able to go to work and children not being able to go to school in a normal manner. So social structure is very important because it does give us stability. And right now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, that's been highly disrupted. So it makes sense that we're all under a lot of stress and not feeling as secure right now. And then the last is socialization, the process by which individuals learn their culture's way of thinking and behaving. Now, this is so important. It's teaching the rules of society, teaching the way that society and all of the people within that society, the way that is acceptable to behave. Now, who is mostly responsible for that? Well, it's supposed to be the family. But unfortunately, you see families that right now are, or for quite a few generations, have been breaking up because of divorce, affected by so many things. And so the family is not as stable as it once was. And you also have all the influence of all the media, which has only really been in our society as for maybe the last 20 years, the way that we see it today. And so you've got so many more influences today on this socialization process. How do we teach children the rules of society and what's acceptable, what behavior is acceptable? Again, you have to be taught at a very young age. Socialization is done from the time we're born until the time we're 6 or 7. It continues, but the basic socialization is done very early in life. And again, usually by the family. And if it isn't, you're going to have all kinds of problems. And you get people that don't learn the rules, or they learn the wrong set of rules and they break the rules and they don't learn proper behaviors. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we're seeing a lot more of today. We're seeing people that are not being socialized by families very well. And frequently you see the media being one of the major influences, and that isn't always a good influence. Maybe sometimes, but usually it isn't. Or you see young children that are out in the neighborhood because they've got parents that aren't paying attention and they're roaming around and getting involved in gangs. And gangs cannot properly socialize children. So socialization is a crucial um, uh, function of a society, to socialize children to become, to grow up to be um, contributing adults, responsible adults. And this is a very difficult thing right now, with all of the media influence and with families that have gone through so many disruptions and problems. Um, so it's very difficult now. And you're seeing that the whole socialization process has been somewhat broken down in the last 50 years. And it's changed pretty dramatically just in my lifetime. So it's very, very important, but unfortunately, it's not being done quite as well as it once was. Now, we'll be using most of these definitions throughout the semester, and there will be many of them on your first quiz for Chapter 1. So it's good to review those and understand those. And Chapter 2 is talking about the rich and the poor, and primarily poverty. And this is a huge social problem, and again, it fits the definition. A large number of people do believe that poverty is a problem. And so the first thing the book does is that explains and defines income and wealth. And usually income and wealth go together, but they don't always. So the definition of income is your salary, the wages you get from your job, or from other investments like maybe a rental property that you have and you get rent every month from someone. So that will be considered income. Wealth is a person's total economic assets. For instance, cash, real estate, stocks. Now, usually people with a very high income from their job have a chance to accumulate a lot of wealth, such as cash and real estate, etc. But not always. Some people spend everything they have. Some people actually spend more than they're earning. They may use credit cards, and they actually end up having bills that are way beyond what they are actually earning every month. So they may have a high salary, but if they are spending more than they earn, then they may not have a chance to accumulate a lot of wealth. Also, some wealthy people don't have a big income. Maybe they inherited it from their family, from their parents or grandparents. And so maybe they don't even work, but they have a lot of wealth. They have cash. They have real estate. They have a lot of stock in companies because it was handed down to them from their family. So normally income and wealth go together, but they don't always. And then the next definition is poverty. And the book says that it's having insufficient funds to provide a minimum standard of living and being significantly worse off than the average person. And in our country, the poverty line is set at $23,492. So people and that's for a family of four. So for a family of four that is living on less than $23,492 will be considered living in poverty. And then what is extreme poverty? The poorest of the poor. And these are families that are actually living on half, less than half. They're earning less than half the poverty level. In this country, that would be less than $12,000 a year. So if you have a family of four living on less than $12,000, they would be considered living in extreme poverty. Well, who are the poor? And first of all, it says children. 36% or 16.4 million of the people living in poverty are children. Normally, they are children living with single parents, usually a single mother. And that's why you see as number 3 on the outline, 58% of poor people are women. And again, usually it's because a woman has not been able to, that she's had children very young, wasn't able to finish her, or married very young, didn't finish her education, and maybe didn't have the ability to secure a good paying job. So a lot of the poor are single mothers with children, and so obviously that puts them both into the category of poverty. But also, the majority are white people. Now, I know in our area, you might not think that that is true because you see a lot of people of color living in poverty. But because there are more white people in our country, if you look at the total number of poor, just look at the total number, there are they are mostly, well, the majority are, they have a higher percentage are white. So I know that may not be true in our area, but it is in other areas of the country. Now, if you separate the different cultures, the white and the Hispanic and the black, you would definitely see that even though black people only make up 13% of the people in our country, they have a much higher percentage of poverty on the whole. So if you separate the groups, yes, people of color have a higher percentage of poverty. But if you just look at the total number of people living in poverty, it's mostly white people because there's more white people in our country. And then what is the lifestyle of the poor? Well, obviously, they usually have not a very good diet and not very good nutrition. Many of them don't have the money to spend on expensive fresh vegetables and fruits, and so many of them do not have a good diet. They may not even have enough to eat. They may have money to eat well once in a while, but not all the time. And so frequently they don't have the nutrition that wealthy people have. And they tend to have a diet that's higher in fat and sugar and fast food. They also have a higher infant mortality rate, and that means that their babies die. Children under the age of 2 die more often in families that are poor. And that's primarily because of their living conditions. They may get sick more often because they don't have proper heating in the winter, or they don't have proper food. But it can also mean that they don't have access to good medical care. So frequently people that live in poverty have their children die before the age of 2 more often than wealthy people. And then they tend to have less education. They don't have the educational opportunity. Frequently their families can't help them to get a college education. And so frequently getting a lot of education is very difficult for them. And then they're less likely to vote. Why is that important? Well, because you're voting for the people that hopefully will understand your problems and help you to do something about them. But unfortunately, poor people are so worried about getting enough to eat, having a roof over their head, that they're not too involved in politics and worrying about politics. And it's unfortunate because then who does vote? The wealthy. And so they tend to vote for other wealthy people and people that will be supporting the things that are important to them, which is, lower taxes for the wealthy and for their businesses. And so the fact that they don't vote can definitely be a drawback, but you can understand why they don't, because they have a lot of other concerns. And then they tend to have more health problems, again, because of their nutrition, because of their living conditions, and because they don't have the best access to health care. They tend to have more health problems, and therefore they tend to have a shorter lifespan. Poor people do tend to die at a much younger age than wealthy people. And that doesn't mean that wealthy people can't get a disease and die young, but frequently they do have access to a lot of very good medical care and living conditions, and so frequently it can extend their life. And then poor people tend to get exposed and actually be part of serious crime and drugs more often. They tend to live in areas where there's a lot of crime and drugs. And so they either tend to be a victim of it, or sometimes they even get involved and become part of it. And so they do tend to be affected by crime and drugs much more often than wealthy people. Not that wealthy people can't get involved in it, but not as often as poor people. And then they tend to have a higher divorce rate. And that's probably because there's more stress. And when you put stress on a marriage and more problems and more difficulties, eventually it cracks. And so, and again, wealthy people get divorced, but they tend to have money for counselors. They tend to have money for vacations to get away from the stress. They tend to have money for babysitters so they can get away from the kids once in a while. They have the options that poor people don't have to get help with their problems. And so frequently you see a much higher divorce rate with poor people. So as you can see, the lifestyle of poor people is not very good. And that's why most of us don't want to live in poverty if there's any way for us not to. Well, one of the biggest problems of poverty is homelessness. And you see a lot of people in extreme poverty will end up homeless. And who are those people? Well, more than half of homeless people are African American. And again, you may not see that around our area, but in other parts of the country where there are larger populations of African Americans, many of them do live in poverty. They have not, even since from 200 years ago, with and 250 years ago, the repercussions of slavery have kept them out of opportunities, and and racial prejudice has kept them out of the opportunities that a lot of uh, uh, not just white people, but but that yeah, mostly wealthy people have had better opportunities to get more education, and they have businesses handed down to them from their families, and things that have made it easier for them to have a higher income. So yes, more than half of the homeless people in our country are African American. And then almost a third have drug or alcohol problems. And I almost think this is higher, but the book says one third have drug and alcohol problems. And when those problems become when addiction becomes very serious, it becomes almost impossible to work and be responsible in your job. So many of them cannot work and take care of themselves, so they become homeless. And they say one fourth have mental health problems. Again, I think that's probably higher. And if you put it together, if you look at the homeless, even our own community right now in Visalia, a large percentage of them have a combination of mental health problems and drug and alcohol problems. So if you look at the homeless, a huge percentage have either a mental health issue, a drug or alcohol issue, or both. And frequently it's both. And then also the number that they estimate in our country today is 3 million. Now, I think, again, I believe that's gotten higher, especially with all the things that have happened in the last 10 years. You looked at the big recession in 2008, and there was a lot more homelessness because of the loss of jobs. And right now, with the pandemic, and people have lost their jobs again, and so you're probably going to see a higher number of homeless. Even our own community, we're pushing almost 2,000 homeless people. So I think it's a little bit higher than that, but we're going to go by what the book says, and they say approximately 3 million. So the homeless problem is very, very difficult. It's one right now that we will talk about later, but it is the number one problem for most communities right now. What do we do with people who can't take care of themselves, who can't provide um, uh, just the basic for their basic needs? And how do we handle this problem? And it's one of the major problems for most communities today. Well, then we also talk about the working poor. There are people who do work, and maybe they even work more than one job, and yet they cannot seem to get above the poverty line. And so the book says that one fifth of all people living in poverty are working, but they do not earn enough money to keep a family of four out of poverty. And why is that? Well, because if you are working at McDonald's and you're working for minimum wage, even if you work full time, that probably is not going to be enough money to feed a family of four to get above $24,000 a year. So, minimum wage jobs do tend to still keep people in poverty. So there are many people that are out there working, trying so hard to provide for themselves and their family, and they still can't make enough money to stay out of poverty. So I think sometimes in our minds, we always think that the poor are people that don't try, they're lazy, but that is not always the case. So one fifth of poor people do have jobs, but they just still can't make enough money to get out of poverty. Well, here is where some of this, if you want to call it prejudice against poor people, comes from. In our country, again, frequently we have a certain a belief system that if you're poor, it's your own fault. And where does that come from? And it comes from what they call the ideology of individualism, which is what our country is based on. And what that belief system says is that each person should work hard and strive to succeed. And I think that's a good idea. I think that makes us feel good about ourselves when we work hard because we've accomplished something. And I think that makes us all feel good about ourselves. But we do believe in what they call the work ethic in our country. And so it is the belief that we should all work hard and try to succeed. Therefore, we do believe that those who work hard should be rewarded. If you're working hard, you should be rewarded with some success, which in our society, that means some kind of wealth or power. And so we do believe that if you work hard, you deserve to have some of those rewards. But number three, it says, therefore, people who work hard will get those things. You deserve them, but you will get them. If you just work hard enough, that you will be rewarded and have some wealth and power and success. Therefore, if you don't, if you are poor or have economic failure, it's your own fault. It's lack of effort or just poor money management, laziness. And so frequently what we're taught with this ideology of individualism is that we all should be working hard, and if you work hard, you will succeed, and if you then are poor, then it's your own fault. And many people really do believe that. And I know that if you see people that aren't working or that have to take government assistance, many of us judge those people. And we think, well, they're just lazy. Well, maybe some are, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them haven't been given the opportunities that others have had. I know for myself, I was a very fortunate person. My parents were both educated. My father had a PhD in nuclear physics, and he always had a very good job. And so he believed in education, and he made sure that I got my education. And so, was that a privilege? Was that a gift? Yes, it was. And is it a gift and a privilege that everyone has? No, it isn't. And so for some people, that gift and that privilege is so hard to get because they don't come from a family that values education or can help them with their education. So um, poverty isn't always a person's fault. But yet in our society, we are taught that if you work hard, you'll just be successful. So if you're not successful and rich, then you must just be lazy. You just haven't worked hard enough. But that isn't always the case. So I think we need to be very careful of judging one another um, in that way. Well, one of the things that is a big controversy, obviously, is the welfare system. And many people that are living in poverty rely on government assistance and what we call the welfare system to survive. And we all know that the welfare system isn't exactly the best system. And frequently people get trapped within it and have a very hard time getting out of it. Again, who are most of the people in the welfare system? Single mothers with children. And that's why I can't stress enough that before any of us have children, we should try to get some education so that we can have a decent job and provide for ourselves and our children. But I know that that isn't so easy for a lot of people. But the welfare system can help people for the right reasons, and that's what it was for. It was to help people temporarily so that they could get back on their feet. And actually, a lot of the whole idea. Well, the welfare system didn't even exist until the 1960s, and Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, um, came up with the War on Poverty, and so he developed what they now call, what is the welfare system, and it was first developed in order to help people temporarily that were having difficulty providing for themselves and their families. And so it was supposed to be a temporary form of assistance. Unfortunately, the welfare system, within the system, it did not build enough accountability. In other words, it gave people money, but it didn't go out there and watch how they were using it. And so some people used it properly, but we know some people don't. It was a good idea. They thought it would really help people get out of poverty, but unfortunately, a lot of people just stayed in the welfare system and never really got out of it. And so now we see a whole different situation with government assistance today. But there have been some changes in our welfare system. I think we all can see that in a lot of situations it doesn't work very well. But there have been some changes. And the biggest change in the welfare system was that each state was given the power to design their own welfare system, and that was done by President Clinton. So when he came into office, he believed that different areas have people with different needs. And that's true. You have some states that are wealthier, some communities that are wealthier, some rural areas that are poorer. And so he changed the welfare system. Before President Clinton, the welfare system was a federal program, a national program with federal rules. But he changed that so that each state could make their own rules. And in California, actually, each county can make their own rules. So what qualifies you for assistance in Tulare County is different than what would qualify you for assistance in Kings County. So you can see where how difficult it would be to monitor all of this because every county in California has a different set of criteria for their government assistance program. So it's not easy to monitor and watch what people are doing with the money or the programs that they're getting. So, but it did make sense to do that because obviously some areas of the country are poorer, some are not. And so I guess it made sense to let each state develop their welfare system and the criteria for eligibility in their own way. Well, in the welfare system, they have what they call cash programs and non-cash programs. The cash programs are Social Security, that is for older people or people that have retired, and that is cash. The government actually gives you a check. Now, if you work, you have to put into that system also. So for all the years that you work, if you put into the Social Security system, in other words, they take a certain amount of money out of your check every month and they put it into the Social Security system. And then when you retire, depending on how much you've earned, you get a certain amount of money every month. So that is a check that the government gives back to you after you retire. So that's cash. Also, disability. If you are a person that's deaf, blind, for whatever reason, disabled, in a wheelchair, and cannot work, then the government does feel that it's appropriate to help those people. So if you can prove that you are disabled in some way and not able to work, the government will actually give you a check. So that is cash. And then it used to be called AFDC, Aid to Families with Children, but now it is called TANF. And so again, this is to families that have lost their job or for whatever reason have children that they can't provide for, and so that is a check. They will, if they believe you qualify for whatever reason, you have lost your job or don't have a job and can't provide for yourself and your children, then the government will actually give you a check. So those are cash programs. But there's also non-cash programs. There's Medicaid for older people. There's Medi-Cal, which in California, which is health insurance that is paid for by the government. And then there's also the food card, the EBT card. And that is a card that you can use at the grocery store. So those are there to help you, but they're not actual cash. Those are called non-cash programs. Well, and what is Social Security? Again, Social Security is help for the elderly because as you get older and you don't work anymore, although people are working older and older today, but at some point, most people retire and some people become elderly and can't work anymore. And so our government, again, if they've taken Social Security, if you have worked over the years and you put into the Social Security system, the government will pay you some every month once you're retired. Well, how did that come about? Well, it came about, it was proposed by President Roosevelt back in 1933, and it was part of what they call the New Deal. And when we went through the horrible, horrible depression, the crash of 1929, so many people were out of work, and particularly the elderly. They had a very difficult time. Older people had a very difficult time providing for themselves. Younger people could find some kind of work, even if it was physical labor. But if you were elderly, obviously that would be very difficult to do. And so elderly people usually are not as strong and healthy. And so the elderly really had a tough time during the Depression. So President Roosevelt started the Social Security system to try to help the elderly through that very difficult time in history. And then it has continued because obviously as you get older, some people can work, but some people can't, and they begin to have more health problems. So in our country, there is a certain attitude that we should help the elderly. So the Social Security has been a pretty secure system in our country. So these are the things that affect whether or not you are rich or poor. You won't get rich on Social Security, but it certainly helps. A lot of older people would really be destitute if they did not have the Social Security system. So it does help quite a bit. So obviously there is a big difference between the rich and the poor. There's a difference in lifestyle, and unfortunately there is getting to be a larger and larger gap between the rich and the poor in our country. We'll talk about this later when we talk about the government, because we live in a capitalist government, and so people are allowed to have their own business and own private property and make money. And again, in our society, like we said before, money and wealth are what are important in our culture. I don't believe it's the most important, but we are taught that people that are wealthy and powerful are in the upper class. So, but we're seeing that gap is getting bigger and bigger. There seems to be the same amount of rich people. There always seems to be a percentage of people that are in that very, very wealthy category. And normally a very wealthy person, their income is on the average $300,000 a year or higher. And those are considered wealthy people in the upper class. And again, they're usually highly educated. And they usually make more money and frequently pass that on to their children. They're able to educate their children. And so their children can usually end up staying in the upper class. But what's happened is the middle class has shrunk. The jobs that were there once for the middle class have gone away due to technology. And so, and you're seeing more and more people with mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues. And those issues are not really dealt with very well in our country. And so those people are having more and more problems. So you're seeing the gap between the rich and the poor seem to grow. And unfortunately, that's what's been happening in our country. So obviously, that's probably why a lot of you are in school right now, because the lifestyle of the poor is very difficult. And you don't have to be rich to be happy. There are a lot of rich people that are very unhappy, but and they have their own problems. But obviously, the lifestyle of the poor is very difficult. That is a very hard life with a lot of stress and problems. So obviously, one of the major social problems of our time right now is helping people to stay out of poverty and to be able to take care of themselves and their family. So that is chapter 1 and chapter 2. And hopefully if you go over all of the outline and this lecture, you will do really well on your first quiz.